Welcome back to this bonus episode of the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. Usually on this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. Usually we put out an episode every Friday, and we are currently in the middle of our alien and sci-fi horror series. However, this week, we are bringing you the first in a trilogy of bonus crossover episodes to coincide with the release of R.L. Stine's Fear Street movies, which are all getting released on Netflix this month. It's a trilogy of movies. The first one, called 1994, dropped just this weekend on Netflix. Part 2, called 1978, drops next weekend, that's the 9th of July, and Part 3, called 1666, drops the Friday after, on July 16th. Now, the fact that these are new horror movies, but are also based on kind of YA horror fiction from the early 90s, felt like this was the perfect opportunity to collaborate with my good friends Becky Dark and Jill Nolan, the co-hosts of Don't Point That Horror at Me, a fantastic podcast which looks at specifically the point horror books from the early 90s, many of which were written by R.L. Stine. So, what you're about to hear is a spoiler-free review of the first Fear Street movie. Then, once you've seen the movie and you're ready to listen to the spoilerific discussion, head over to Becky and Jill's podcast, Don't Point That Horror at Me, where you can listen to the second half of our discussion as we discuss Fear Street 1994 in spoilerific detail. And we will be bringing you these little pairings of podcast episodes for the next 2 weekends to coincide with the whole trilogy. Very, very exciting. So just to emphasize, anybody can listen to this half of the chat on Evolution of Horror, as this will be completely spoiler free. But then I would urge you all to go over to Don't Point That Horror at Me and listen to our hilarious discussion as we deep dive into some of our favourite and least favourite moments in this movie. So, without further ado, let's kick off the first part of our crossover event. Don't Point That Evolution of Horror at Me. Becky Dark and Jill Nolan, hello!
Hello.
Hey, Mike.
Hello. How are we all today?
We're all good. We've all had quite the weekend. So yeah, we're fine. We're jaded, but we're here.
Yeah, we're all like cradling coffees and water. And
Yeah, I've had a coffee and a Vimto, so
Ooh.
I think I'm ready to chat.
Power lunch.
Becky, just remind people who are listening right now to Evolution of Horror, tell us a little bit about your podcast and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Jill and I co-host a podcast called Don't Point That Horror at Me, where we semi-regularly look at the old, like kind of late 80s and 90s teen paperback horror books, the point horrors. So they have loads of different authors. So you've got like Caroline B. Cooney and who else? Deborah Ho and Richie Tankersley Cusick, RTC, and R.L. Stine. So we're over there. Oh yeah, we've both got our t-shirts on, as you can see. Well,
so
the listeners can't, but Mike, you've got that. Yeah, we used to do the monthly when we first started out, but we do these like epic deep dives, which then turn into these sort of like 4-hour long episodes where we look at the books and we talk about kind of the 90s context around them. And Jill does amazing stuff about all of the music that was out at the time, and I have a look at like the kind of cinema box office.
We go off on various tangents as well. That's why they end up being so long. But
the tangents do not help the timekeeping. Yeah,
the tangents are what it's all about, though, right? I mean, that's the joy of it.
100%. And there's so much fun stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
So anyway, we don't do them monthly anymore. We put them out when we have time amongst our busy lives. But as Jill says, like, people seem to love it, and we enjoy it very much. And when Netflix announced that they were doing the Fear Street films, it just seemed like the perfect opportunity for a little cross collaboration situation.
Yeah, the crossover you've all been waiting for.
Oh, so exciting. Jill, as this is your first time on Evolution of Horror, I need to ask you, what is your kind of relationship with horror movies? Are you a big horror cinema fan?
Well, we did have a little chat about this on Friday, I think.
Yeah.
But
it was a blurry memory.
I'm not a massive horror fan like you guys are. I'm more into like the cheesy kind of horror, like Hammer horror, League of Gentlemen, sort of comedy horror.
Mm-hmm.
But then obviously the classics like Scream, The Craft, if that counts as horror.
It does, it definitely does.
The classic 90s one.
Yeah, anything 90s, is right up my street. But yeah, so I'm more like a soft horror fan.
yeah, fair enough. That's good. Now, before we get into the film, let me ask you guys, because obviously this isn't point horror, but it's from that era, right? And obviously, like we said, it's R.L. Stine. Becky, are you familiar with the kind of the series of books, the Fear Street stories? Did you sort of know anything about them before this film?
No, not at all. So, like, R.L. Stine is like a real kind of... he's a bit of a stalwart of the point horrors. Like, he's one of the most famous authors, and I think, like, out of all of the authors, maybe he's gone on to do like the most kind of other stuff, so he's probably had the most enduring career. And he's done, like, he did all the Goosebumps books, and like I'm a little bit old for the Goosebumps books. Like, I kind of wasn't still like reading that stuff like when they came out. I guess I'd sort of graduated, I guess, from
moved on to Stephen King.
Yeah, exactly. Dean Koontz. So I've never read a Dean Koontz. So he did all the Goosebumps, which then obviously has like turned into TV shows and movies themselves, etc., etc. And like, have you guys seen the Goosebumps movies? Like, I've actually only seen the first one, but it's really good.
It's really good with Jack Black.
Yeah, it's so great. Like, it's proper worth a watch. Yeah. And then the kind of publicity started around this, that, Netflix had picked up a 3-part Fear Street thing. And I'm like, oh, hello. Like, he's done something else. And I've looked into it, and my deep research, like I always do for all my podcasts, I looked it up on Wikipedia. Yeah. But yeah, so it was like it was a similar time. I think it was slightly later. So again, like a little bit with the point horror books, you have like Jill. There's like Unleashed and like Nightmare Hall and stuff, isn't there? Which are these sorts of.
I think that from the sort of point horror community on Twitter, because there's a lot of really, really fun sort of point horror fans out there that we interact with. So from what I understood from what they were saying once it was announced, Fear Street, it's like similar to point horror, but like a bit darker and a bit more grown up. Mm-hmm. So it's like Goosebumps is for like the kids, and then point horror is like early teens, mid-teens. And then once we get into discussing the film, it's a bit more grown up.
Yeah.
And a bit scarier. Like, yeah,
definitely.
That's what I understood of it.
I remember the excitement when they announced that it was going to be like rated R. Like, I know it's different over here, but it was all like, oh, amazing. Like, even though it's kind of a Netflix thing, like they were really going to go for it. And I know that the fans of Fear Street were really excited, because I think you're right, Jill. Like, it does have this reputation as being like that slightly grislier, darker, more kind of like graphic, like stories and like killings and like there's sex and stuff like that in it. So yeah, I think there was a lot of excitement online, and that was when Jill and I sort of like our ears pricked up,
Yeah, very exciting. And it's a really cool thing that they've done, where they've made it into a trilogy. Netflix are doing one after the other on 3 consecutive weeks kind of thing. It's quite a fun way to sort of release them all, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, because they are all sort of interconnected. And from what I saw on Wikipedia, some of the so Fear Street is a little bit like Goosebumps or point horror, so it's like different characters in each book. It's not necessarily just like a big serial where it's like this continuing story, but there are some recurring characters and some of the kind of core story around like the witch. I know in the film she's called Sarah Fear. I'm not sure if she has the same first name in the books, but like the witch whose surname was Fear, like she was executed by the Good family, and so obviously you get those characters like coming through in the film. So I don't know that the films are necessarily like the stories and the plots are specifically based on books, but you do have some of those like recurring like popular characters kind of coming in.
That's really cool, isn't it? And, you know, ever since these movies were announced a couple of weeks ago, the trailers dropped, everyone was really excited about it, I think. You know, this is a teen slasher. It's a bit of 90s nostalgia in the first one. You know, I think everyone was super up for these movies. So let's discuss what we thought of it then. Let's begin our conversation, spoiler-free, of Fear Street Part 1, 1994.
Another Shady Side tragedy. Fits the narrative, right?
Sarah Fear's back.
Christ, not you too.
There's no angry, dead witch. The only thing that made him go crazy is this town.
The dude was wearing a Halloween skull mask. How is that not fun? Guys, I think there's someone in the woods.
Now, Jill Nolan, you have a beautiful plot synopsis at the ready for us, I believe. Take it away.
Dina, Josh, Kate and Simon, 4 friends from the wrong side of the tracks between rival towns, Shadyside and Sunnyvale. Legend has it that Shadyside is cursed by Sarah Fear, an ancient witch who cut off her own hand in a pact with the devil. When a pattern of serial killings begins again in 1994, the teens must team up with Dina's ex to try and stop the witch for good. But will they all survive with their lives and their friendships intact?
Oh, beautiful. And that synopsis was, I believe, written by Becky Dark. Is that right?
Yeah, in the style of a point horror blurb.
So
very,
good.
very much so.
Mike, was it you who suggested to do it in the sort of, you know, back of a point horror book type
Yes.
blurb? So I actually went to my shelves and got all of my R.L. Steins off of the just to remind myself, you know, the style, the vibe, just so I was true to the vibe of Mr. Stein. So, yeah.
I love it. Well, you nailed it. So, Jill, let me come to you first. What did you think of Fear Street 1994?
I actually did really enjoy it, yeah. I think because it is very reminiscent of those 90s teen slashers, and the soundtrack is amazing.
Slaps.
Right up my street, of course. So yeah, I honestly really did enjoy it, and it was. I wasn't expecting it to be so graphic.
I know, right?
With the killings. But I was really pleasantly surprised actually, because I didn't really have much expectation going into it, because I didn't know anything really about Fear Street apart from what we just discussed. So I was very open-minded, and I was pleasantly surprised.
I love it. Becky, what about you? We've talked a lot together about slasher movies. We love a good teen slasher. We love a good 90s slasher. Did this movie kind of do it for you? Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it so much. Honestly, I always go into these things, especially if they're kind of set around teens, and I know there's going to be I think actually the thing that excited me most about this, once I'd seen the trailer, was it was going to be this mashup of teen slasher, and also you've got the witch stuff in the background, which again, like with Jill, that's very much kind of our wheelhouse. So I was really I went into it wanting to enjoy it, but sometimes that can set you up for disappointment, can't it? But it didn't at all. I came away from it. I was literally at the end, I was like, oh my God, it says to be continued. And I genuinely can't wait to see what happens.
I know. Yeah. I was, when this one ended, I was really oh my God, bring on part 2. Yeah. I kind of generally agree with you. I enjoyed this movie a lot. I had fun with it. I've got a few problems with it here and there. And I think that mainly is down to me being a bit of a grumpy old man and maybe just not really enjoying teen slasher movies in the way that I used to, because I'm old now. But otherwise, I actually did think, I think a younger audience will love this. I think teenage me would have absolutely loved this. The horror is a lot stronger and gorier than I was expecting as well. So overall, I thought this was really impressive.
And I think what I really enjoyed about this one was I know that Mike and I, we've talked about this a lot in the films that we've spoken about over the years that we've now been doing this. Freaky, weird, scary. Weird. I don't like it. But there's something about those 4 or 5 like key characters in it that I genuinely didn't want them to come to harm. They, especially kind of as slashers sort of went on and they just did become those like meat grinder sort of body count films. And the characters just got more and more obnoxious. So you just couldn't wait for them to all meet some sort of grisly end. Yeah. With this, I genuinely thought it was really well written, and that I was concerned for these people. Like, I really liked them. They're not like perfect, and some of them make some slightly dubious decisions, but I was just like, I don't know, I was into it. Like, I was invested in them, and I think that kind of, for me, just like raised it above a little bit, just the kind of, I don't know, some of the trashier stuff.
Talking about the characters and how sort of well written they were, and you can kind of root for them. They all have a different sort of teen slasher, teen movie trope that they represent, but not so one-dimensionally. So there's like the sad goth and the cheerleader and the nerd and the prankster, but they're all sort of more than that.
Yeah. That's it. Like, they kind of strip away those sort of stereotypes, I suppose, as it goes on, don't they? Which is really nice. And also, they actually look like kids, which is quite unusual. That's something that isn't similar to the 90s slashers, right? Where they all actually look about in
35.
Yeah. I was genuinely like, hang on. Like, especially the little boy, Josh, the brother that like sits on the couch. I was like, he's amazing. And I was like, but he's literally a child. I was like, nothing's actually going to happen to him, is it? But like you said, Becky, like, you genuinely kind of worry about them a bit more. And I think that's partly because of it as well, because when you're watching like Skeet Ulrich and people like that, you're like, well, he looks like an adult, it's like this massive built, like buff older man. Whereas, these kids, it's like, oh my god, you don't want any harm to happen to these actual children.
I'm honestly like the most like jaded horror fan. Like, I'm always the one who is there just like cheering on the most gory ends to these like fucking kids. I'm just like, decapitate the fucker. And with this, there was one moment, which obviously I won't say now because this is the spoiler-free bit, but I gasped out loud.
I think I know what you mean. I texted you about it, Mike. It's the same.
I couldn't believe it either.
Horrified.
And that made me like it so much more. I was like, all right, film, you've won me over.
They did actually do that.
They sort of went there with it. Because initially there's a bit of it that I kind of was a bit like, I don't know, like I find myself getting a bit tired of this like Netflix, Stranger Things, Riverdale kind of like, I don't know, a little bit style over substance, I suppose. Like a little bit like it's like vomiting nostalgia on you and not really giving you much else,
But the thing is, I'm such a sucker for that.
Exactly.
Just give me nostalgia.
Me and Jill are just like, get it in our eyeballs.
Yeah, flash different 90s things across the screen. Which was basically what the sort of prologue bit was in the mall. I was like,
I was literally like writing them down, just like, I need to talk to Jill about this stuff. There's like, there's literally like neon,
lava lamps, neon, glow in the dark things, band tees, glow sticks, Halloween and skeleton masks that glow in the dark, and then there's like signs in the mall, in the shop, on each sort of like section. It's like candles, glow sticks, new age.
Oh god!
One of them's at least one of them's wearing a Baby G watch. I'm sure of it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
See, that is initially that is something that puts me off. I'm like, oh no. But like we just said, the characters were good enough, and actually the story was kind of good as well, and we'll get into like the story specifics later, but I actually really enjoyed the kind of supernatural story at the heart of it, and kind of uncovering this mystery and them having to sort of survive it and beat the monster and everything. It's good. But yeah, and this is going to make me sound about 75 years old, but like also initially I was like, does everything have to be so fast? I was like, like, I know that makes me sound incredibly old, but I was like, it's edited a bit like a music video for like the first 30 minutes of it, where it's like needle drops every 5 minutes. Here's another 90s banger, and here's some more neon, and we're going to go to this and we're going to go to that. And I was like, I'm ready. I want it to slow down and get scary. When is it going to slow down and get scary? And it did eventually, but
Becky
again,
looks appalled.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm going to agree. I don't want to agree, but I do agree.
yeah.
So there was a
because
thing.
it'd been down a notch.
It could just like a notch.
Yeah.
There was a thing with the music where it opens with like garbage or
Closer.
something. Right.
Yeah.
It opens with 9 Inch Nails. Amazing.
Yeah.
And it's literally like, I don't know, like, you know, you get most films that have like a banging soundtrack, and even if, you know, it's like a nostalgic soundtrack, they will sort of drop them in from time to time. I think you got about like 10 different songs within the first 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my pen was like,
Yeah.
oh my god. It's
really,
trying to keep
like,
track of them all.
It isn't an objection because they're all bangers. And
They are
like,
all bangers,
And
yeah.
I love that they're, you know, Jill will probably come on later to tell us how some of them are anachronistic. But anyway, but there was a part of me where I was like, I'm basically just like watching a like MTV playlist.
It is a bit like that, and fair enough. Like, this is again not necessarily for our age group, and like again, I really do think teenagers will.
No, it's
fucking love
100%.
this.
Mike, no teenagers today will have heard of any of these songs.
They weren't
That's a
even
good
born.
That is okay. That is a very good point.
It's
But
100% for us.
okay, but maybe because of that, maybe this is a slight problem with it. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's catering for both audiences, which is a good thing. But also, there's a risk that potentially alienates both. I think because. I don't know. It's shot and edited like a Riverdale episode, right? Or, you know, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Things that are very much those
that's a good
Netflix
point.
dramas
Yeah.
that are very much aimed at a younger generation. And because of that, they are edited a bit like TikTok videos, you know, and they're slightly more cool than they are scary. This movie does have moments of horror, but if you actually compare it to the 90s movies that it's sort of evoking, like Scream, we all love Scream, right? Scream was directed by Wes Craven. It was actually, yes, it had lots of cool needle drops, but it was also properly scary, had some slower paced character moments, it had some real dark drama at the heart of it. This wasn't really like that. This was like something from MTV.
Again, do teenagers even watch MTV anymore?
Yeah,
Probably not.
yeah.
Probably not.
In fact, MTV isn't even music anymore.
No.
Is it? It's like Real
No, it's
Housewives
like
and
Cribs
stuff.
and
Yeah. So I don't know what I'm talking about.
While we're on Scream, can we talk about some of the very, very obvious Scream?
Oh yeah.
homages? Oh wait, are we
The whole
allowed?
opening.
Wait, are we allowed?
Maybe we should get into that in specifics
Yeah.
in a bit. But we
I
will
got
say, let's
overexcited.
just say, I mean, like, I was going to ask you, Becky, like, what reference, and we won't talk about specific examples yet,
Fine.
but what movies did you notice nods towards? I mean, obviously Scream is the number one, right?
Yes, Scream, and
Yeah.
I can like there was a general vibe of that,
There really
but
was,
also
yeah.
I can just off the top of my head without looking at my notes, I can think of 3 specific, obvious like
Yeah.
callbacks. I love that. Absolutely no problem with that at
Love
all.
it. Yeah.
Big fan. I love a like an in joke and a callback. It makes me feel clever.
Yeah. Buffy too, right? I mean, like, this was written before, but like the stories, because it's weird that the town is called Sunnyvale, because I
Right.
just
Oh
kept
my
thinking
god, yeah. I
Sunnydale,
was
right?
saying, like
Yeah.
the whole way through. And then when I knew we were going to do this podcast, I was like, right, it's Sunny Vale.
Vale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
Not Sunny Dale, Sunny Vale.
I think when I saw the trailer, it said like Shady Side and Sunnyvale. I literally went, ha!
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds so stupid. But yeah, like, I guess R.L. Stein's books were written before Sunnydale was a thing.
Yeah,
right?
I'll have to check the dates, but I think it's around the same time.
I think it was like 1989, 1990. I think was like the first Fear Street. I think.
Jesus!
Unless I'm wrong, but yeah, I
didn't read my Wikipedia page closely enough, obviously.
1989 to 1999 was the Fear Street series.
There you go. Fucking
so,
hell!
Wow.
So
maybe Joss is a fan.
Yeah. But I think also, didn't it have a bit of a Buffy vibe too, in like these kids fighting off these kind of supernatural, demonic, witchy kind of entities, and the sort of banter mixed in with the horror and that kind of thing? In some ways, like tonally, I thought it was more similar to Buffy than maybe movies like Scream in a way, you know?
Yeah, I think
you're right.
I think what your point to like the supernatural side of it, I think if it had just been a straight slasher, I wouldn't have got that vibe so much, but with the kind of the like, with Buffy being like on the Hellmouth and with this legend sort of surrounding the town of Shady Side.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Shady
Cheers,
Side. It's so funny.
I know. Like it couldn't like smash you in the face with it more. Like the whole thing about like Sunnyvale being like the rich ones who are all super popular, not popular, like prosperous,
like perfect.
Yeah. And then you've got like what was it again?
The shady side.
Shady side, like these people who are like cursed and they're all like poor, and like, everyone keeps dying.
Yeah. There's not a moment of subtlety to be had in this entire film, is there? But again, that's fine. That's not what it's going for.
I'm here for that. Yeah,
exactly. Sometimes you need something like this, you know, especially if we, like this weekend. If we're all feeling a bit jaded, hungover, and it's like pretty lights, great music, nice and easy.
Yeah.
Like,
there is so much neon in that opening. Like I was loving it, and I told you two that I was going to watch these films yesterday. I didn't. I watched them today, and it was exactly what I needed. Like as you say, don't make me think about too much. Give it to me all on a plate with some pretty lighting. I'm into it.
So there you go. So we should get into spoilers, but I'll finish by just asking you guys, like, I guess we'll probably know the answer to this, but like, would you recommend people check this out on Netflix at home? Jill, would you recommend this to people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're into teen slashers and banging 90s music and neon and nostalgia, it's definitely worth a watch. And yeah, go for it.
And actually, Becky, let me ask you one other thing as well. I was going to ask you because, like, we've talked a lot before about how the slasher genre is kind of a little bit dead. Like, really, like you get the odd outliers, or you had Halloween 2018. A few of them kind of come back every now and then, but really, it's not like a thing like it was in the 90s, right, or the early 80s. Do you think that this could end up reviving the slasher? Like, or is this a kind of one and done kind of trilogy, I suppose? Because again, it really is playing on nostalgia, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the fact that it comes under this banner of Fear Street, I think the audience is going to be, you know, the kids who read the books, and people like us who are kind of into this, like, you know, mishmash of like horror films and kind of 90s nostalgia and stuff anyway. And that isn't to say that it's not a good slasher film. Like, it is. And, you know, we'll come on to talk about it when we go into spoilers. You know, there are some really good kind of inventive deaths, and, you know, there's some great kind of scares and gore and stuff in it. I think it will satisfy slasher fans. But I don't think it's kind of iconic enough in its own right that it'll be like a huge kind of moment in horror. Like, and honestly, like, that isn't to say that it isn't good, because, you know, like Jill does, like, I would 100% recommend it, and I did really, really enjoy it. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think it's quite, I don't think it does anything quite different enough for it to like mark a new moment
in the way that sort of Scream did or whatever.
Yeah, because it's more, like harking back to the ones that have gone before in that nostalgia way that we really enjoy, because we recognise the sort of touch points and references. But it's not really doing anything new to like restart a fire.
Yeah.
I know. I was saying, like, I was talking to our friend Anna Bogatskaya about this, who's writing about it, the slashers for the BBC, kind of to coincide with this. And we were talking about how, like, can you still even make a sort of slasher film that's set now? Like, it feels like whenever anyone does a slasher film these days, you have to rely on nostalgia, like The Final Girls, or even It Follows, right, which is sort of a slasher. It's sort of using like John Carpenter music, and it all looks like it's 80s. You know, Halloween 2018 is obviously like taking an old property. Like, it feels like, is the slasher just not a format that you can, I don't know, you can make work in 2021? I don't know. What do you think, Becky?
I don't know that you can ever say that, because I think people would have been having similar conversations, you know, in the early 90s when we had Freddy's Dead and, you know, The Final Nightmare and like Curse of Michael Myers and stuff. And everybody was just like so fucking sick of it. And it felt like it was dead in the water. And then, you know, Wes Craven again, you know, came in with New Nightmare and then Scream, and that kicked off everything. And I think, honestly, if you'd spoken to people in the early 90s and asked them a similar question, they would have been citing films like Candyman, for example, as an outlier, you know, because that isn't a traditional body count slasher film. It was doing something different, but that would have been like a kind of one example amongst like a load of shit.
Yeah.
And then obviously like we had, you know, sort of 6 or 7 years of like that being all that horror was, and, you know, huge classics. So yeah, I mean, I'll never say that anything's dead in the water, but definitely at the moment, like
this isn't the one.
This isn't the one. Let's just say I'm looking forward to whatever does that, you know?
Maybe Scream 5 next year. You never know.
Piss off, mate. Come on.
Scream 5 Cream, as it's written, like with the number in the letter. Maybe 5 Cream will resurrect it. We never know. So there you go. Sorry, and I was about to ask you, Becky, before we went off on that tangent, would you recommend Fear Street to people?
Oh yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Give it a watch. Amazing. Well, we'll wrap up this half of the conversation then, and I'll ask you guys to tell us where people can find your podcast, because we'll continue this conversation over on your podcast to get into the details. So, Jill, where can people find your podcast out there in the internet world?
Yeah, right. Come join us over on our side. We are Don't Point That Horror at Me on Facebook, Twitter, at Point Horror Pod on Twitter, and in all the usual podcast places.
Amazing. Guys, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
And there we go. That's it for our spoiler-free half of our Fear Street 1994 discussion. As we mentioned just then, head on over to Don't Point That Horror at Me. You can find that on Apple Podcasts or all the other places, and listen to the second half of our discussion, in which we talk about certain plot details, some of our favourite moments, some of our least favourite moments, and we discuss the ending and our anticipations for next week's episode, 1978. So thank you so much for listening. Don't forget, you can hit us up on Twitter at EvolutionPod. We're also on Instagram at Evolution of Horror. You can email us evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can also find Don't Point That Horror at Me on all the socials. They're on Twitter at PointHorrorPod. Thank you so much for listening, and join us for part 2 of our Fear Street trilogy next weekend, when Jill, Becky and I will be discussing 1978. Can't wait. Join us again soon for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.